So for the last part of this lecture, we're going to be taking a look at important viral families. And let's just kind of go through the different families that are out there and just kind of check off which ones you guys need to know and which ones are maybe not so important. So the Parvoviridae, to start out with those, we will not be talking much about these. There is something called Fifth disease that hasn't been in the news too much, and I don't think we have it on a pathogen group either. Then we have the Adenoviridae. Those you should know about because they're important cold viruses, basically. So if you have a cold, the common cold is usually either an adenovirus or it is a rhinovirus. Then under Parvoviridae, so you should check off this one here. I can do this. Parvoviridae, there we have the human papillomaviruses. There is a vaccine available, the first cancer vaccine actually, because they do cause the cells that they infect to transform into cancerous kind of cells. And so virtually 100% of human cervical viruses, cervical cancers that are seen are caused by these papillomaviruses. And so therefore having a vaccine available, that's great news. So that's Parvoviridae. Then we have the Poxviridae. Of course, there are some important contenders that we also have in our pathogen groups. That would be the smallpox virus, for example, so Poxviridae. The herpes viridae, there are some important human pathogens in here. The simplex viruses, varicella virus, cytomegalovirus would be in this category too. So those are the important ones. The simplex, let me just mark the simplex viruses, varicella virus right here, and the cytomegalovirus right here. Just get that back there. Then the hepatnavirus, the hepatnaviridae, very important. The hepatitis B virus, of course. So that one we're going to have to check this one off too. So next, the category of single-stranded RNA viruses, the plus strand non-enveloped ones. Then we have the Picornaviridae. We talked about these earlier, so you should take a look at that. There's the rhinoviruses and hepatitis A virus, very important ones, these guys here. And then Calciviridae, not so important for you guys, don't need to know really about them. Then here we have the Togaviridae. The rubella virus is in this category. So these are single-stranded RNA viruses with a plus strand, sense strand, that are enveloped. And then the Flaviviridae, very important, several human diseases, namely the flaviviruses, a dengue virus, and West Nile, and then we have the hepatitis C virus in there too. And then, very important, very famous right now, the coronaviridae. So you should definitely know about those, and everybody does know about those. The coronavirus, right there we have the common cold can cause that, and the SARS virus and MERS coronavirus right there. And obviously, everybody's talking about the novel coronavirus 19. Now here we have minus strand RNA viruses, so antisense strand viruses. We will have in a pathogen group, of course, the Alyssa virus that causes rabies. That's the Rhabdoviridae. So let's mark this one right here. Oops, what happened? Okay, so now hopefully checking off here the Rhabdoviridae, rabies virus. Then here's the Filoviridae. This one, that would be the important one here, is the Ebola virus, very deadly virus. And then Paramyxoviridae, the measles virus is in this category. We will have that on a pathogen group separately too. And the last one right here, the Deltaviridae, not so important, so we don't need to check this one off. So finally, here's our last page of important viruses. We have first the Orthomyxoviridae. In this category, we have the influenza virus A, B, and C. So we're going to have to check this one off here. Then the Bunya viridae, there are some interesting viruses in here, namely hantavirus. That thing pops up every now and then. It's very deadly. So if we have time, I will mention that one in lecture again, but it's not on our pathogen groups right now. It will be interesting to talk about, but I just don't think we have time for this one. And then the next one, we don't really need the arenavirus. Arenavirus. However, here, this one is very, very important category of viruses, the retroviridae. Remember, these ones, they operate with the reverse transcriptase, and that is also sort of the best way to try to disable them if you have an inhibitor for this enzyme, the antiretroviral drugs. That's an important part of the HIV treatment. So in this case, we have the lentivirus HIV, in this case, human immunodeficiency virus. And then reoviridae, the rotaviruses, we do have them in a pathogen group. They are mostly gastrointestinal, stomach flu type of one-day nuisance kind of virus. So we do need to check these ones off. Okay. And now let's finish up on this lecture. Very disturbingly, sometimes viruses can cause cancers, and so there are several types of cancers that we know are being caused by viruses, as these viruses are transforming cells from normal cells into cancerous kind of cells. Namely, some viruses can cause sarcomas, that would be cancers of the connective tissue, and others that can cause adenocarcinomas, that would be cancers of glandular epithelial tissue. Because these viruses, they have what's called oncogenes as part of their genome, and oncogenes are those genes that transform normal cells into cancerous type of cells. So there are these oncogenic viruses. They become integrated into the host cell's DNA and then induce the tumors, basically transforming the cell from a normal cell into a cancerous type of cell. Here are some important oncogenic DNA viruses. We have the adenoviridae. They're mostly known as respiratory kind of cold viruses, but they can, some of them have oncogenes. Then we have the herpes viridae, the Epstein-Barr virus, and that one we have in a pathogen group. We'll talk about that. The pox viridae, and then very importantly, the pova viridae. Those are the human papilloma viruses already mentioned. That the human papilloma viruses, they are exclusively the source of cervical cancer in women, and luckily there is now a vaccine available. Hepatnoviridae, the hepatitis B viruses, they can cause liver cancer, of course. Here's one more category of oncogenic viruses. Those are RNA viruses, the retroviridae. So the here in this category we have of course, our HIV is in here too, but then as is true for all retroviruses, the viral RNA is transcribed to DNA using the enzyme reverse transcriptase. Make sure that you know this, so that's important. The reverse transcriptase enzyme goes back from RNA back to DNA in this step that's reverse transcription. Forward transcription, of course, normal transcription is DNA to RNA, but this one goes backwards, therefore reverse transcription. And then the DNA that's generated this way is integrated into the host cell DNA. Here are some important oncogenic retroviruses, the HTLV1 and HTLV2. So these stands for human T-cell leukemia and lymphoma viruses. And here's another important aspect of virology in general, that is that some viruses, they tend to stay latent, and they can be latent sometimes for a lifetime. You may be infected as a child and the virus never really causes any problems, and sometimes in some people it gets reactivated and then comes back. That is true for viruses that cause cold sores and then also shingles. Shingles, typically most people had chickenpox when they were children, and then the virus stayed latent in the ganglia of the nerves, and it can pop up later in life when the immune system slowly goes down, and then pops up as shingles. Sometimes persistent viral infections, they can get worse over time, and that could be fatal. So, for example, here this is given panencephalitis due to the measles virus. So here we have an example of what it could look like when you have a latent infection, sort of a dormant infection, let's say cold sores. Lots of people are infected with this virus that causes cold sores, and then they have an acute infection at first, and then it may stay latent for a lifetime. But then it could be that it gets reactivated due to some event, maybe massive UV exposure. For some people, just something that's really disgusting to them causes the virus to pop up again, or simply that it's called cold sores because your immune system is down because it's fighting off a cold, and you are damaging your skin by rubbing your nose when you're using too many tissues and sneezing and blowing your nose, and then the cells are kind of damaged, and so all of that could contribute to the virus popping up again, and you have what's called a cold sore. So here are some examples for latent viruses. Cold sores are that's pretty common, and then shingles also, that is pretty common. Persistent kind of viral infections, they can here listed what we have here: cervical cancer, those would be the human papilloma viruses, and then HIV/AIDS, that would be HIV 1 and 2, the lentiviruses that are causing them. Liver cancer due to hepatitis B viruses, and then here's also rubella and measles viruses are listed here as persistent. They can be persistent viruses. So to tie everything together here, we have a couple more things, and one infectious particle that we mentioned here is prions. Those are infectious protein particles, and there are some important pathogens here. These are fairly rare diseases, but if somebody gets those, then it's most of the time fatal. We have mad cow disease here. You may have heard of that. That is bovine spongiform encephalopathy, otherwise known as that. And then Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, that's the human form of mad cow disease. Then there's also sheep's scrapie. Those would be the more common diseases in this category. So what happens here is that you have a infectious protein particle, and it basically interacts with a normal protein and converts it into a misfolded protein particles that then starts to accumulate in the brain and forms plaques and turns your brain into a sponge, therefore spongiform encephalopathy. And so here's a diagram of what this could look like. So basically the model has it that you have a normal protein, and that protein is right here in the cell, and nothing happens until here comes this infectious prion protein particle, and basically the interaction, sort of the bumping of these two into one another, will convert the normal protein into another prion protein, infectious protein particle, and goes on and converts more of the normal proteins into the infectious protein prion protein particles. And as this goes on, these infectious prion proteins will accumulate and lead eventually to cell death. So the cell sort of implodes. Now here we have really our last couple of slides. So plant viruses, they enter through wounds or via insects. Then very important definition here, viroids, those are short pieces of naked RNA. So infectious RNA particles. One that's of importance here would be the cause of potato spindle tuber disease, and here this is what that might look like. So this is that potato spindle tuber viroid shown here on the electron micrograph. And our last slide for this lecture here, those would be some major plant viruses, and you don't need to know these. We don't have them in a pathogen group, but it's kind of for completion's sake right here, and you can take a look at that.